the horse's back, to steady him and also to restore him to his seat when desired. By this stratagem the Indians had approached on the present occasion almost within rifle range before they were discovered, and it required the utmost speed of the hunters' horses to enable them to avoid being overtaken. One of the Indians, who was better mounted than his fellows, gained on the fugitives so much that he came within arrow range, but reserved his shaft until they were close on the margin of the wood, when, being almost alongside of Henry, he fitted an arrow to his bow. Henry's eye was upon him, however, letting go the line of the pack horse which he was leading, and he threw forward his rifle. But at the same moment the savage disappeared behind his horse, and an arrow whizzed past the hunter's ear. Henry fired at the horse, which dropped instantly, hurling the astonished Comanche upon the ground, where he lay for some time insensible. In a few seconds pursued and pursuers entered the wood, where both had to advance with caution, in order to avoid being swept off by overhanging branches of the trees. Meanwhile the sultry heat of which Joe had formerly spoken increased considerably, and a rumbling noise, as if of distant thunder, was heard. But the flying hunters paid no attention to it, for the led horses gave them so much trouble and retarded their flight so much that the Indians were gradually and visibly gaining on them. "We'll ha' to let the packs go," said Joe, somewhat bitterly, as he looked over his shoulder. "Our scalps'll pay for it if we don't." Henry uttered a peculiar and significant hiss between his teeth, as he said, "P'raps we've better stop and fight." Dick said nothing, being resolved to do exactly what Joe Blunt bid him; and Crusoe, for reasons best known to himself, also said nothing, but bounded along beside his master's horse, casting an occasional glance upwards to catch any signal that might be given. They had passed over a considerable space of ground, and were forcing their way, at the imminent hazard of their necks, through a densely clothed part of wood, when the sound above referred to increased, attracting the attention of both parties. In a few seconds the air was filled with a steady and continuous rumbling sound, like the noise of a distant cataract. Pursuers and fugitives drew rein instinctively, and came to a dead stand, while the rumbling increased to a roar, and evidently approached them rapidly, though as yet nothing to cause it could be seen, except that there was a dense dark cloud overspreading the sky to the southward. The air was oppressively still and hot. "What can it be?" inquired Dick, looking at Joe, who was gazing with an expression of wonder, not unmixed with concern, at the southern sky. "Dunno, boy. I've been more in the woods than in the clearin' in my day, but I never heerd the likes o' that." "It am like tondre," said Henry. "Mice, it never do stop." This was true. The sound was similar to continuous, uninterrupted thunder. On it came with a magnificent roar that shook the very earth, and revealed itself at last in the shape of a mighty whirlwind. In a moment the distant woods bent before it, and fell like grass before the scythe. It was a whirling hurricane, accompanied by a deluge of rain such as none of the party had ever before witnessed. Steadily, fiercely, irresistibly it bore down upon them, while the crash of falling, snapping, and uprooting trees mingled with the dire artillery of that sweeping storm like the musketry on a battlefield. "Follow me, lads," shouted Joe, turning his horse and dashing at full speed towards a rocky eminence that offered shelter. But shelter was not needed. The storm was clearly defined. Its limits were as distinctly marked by its creator as if it had been a living intelligence sent forth to put a belt of desolation round the world; and, although the edge of devastation was not 500 yards from the rock behind which the hunters were stationed, only a few drops of ice-cold rain fell upon them. It passed directly between the Comanche Indians and their intended victims, placing between them a barrier which it would have taken days to cut through. The storm blew for an hour, then it travelled onward in its might, and was lost in distance. Whence it came and whither it went none could tell, But far as the eye could see on either hand, an avenue a quarter of a mile wide was cut through the forest. It had leveled everything with dust, and the very grass was beaten flat. The trees were torn, shivered, snapped across, and crushed, and the earth itself in many places was plowed up and furrowed with deep scars. The chaos was indescribable, and it is probable that centuries will not quite obliterate the work of that single hour. While it lasted, Joe and his comrades remained speechless and awe-stricken. When it passed, no Indians were to be seen. So our hunters remounted their steeds, and with feelings of gratitude to God for having delivered them alike from savage foes and from the destructive power of the whirlwind, resumed their journey toward the Mustang Valley. Chapter 25.